Yeah,
Yeah.
good to go.
Okay, thank you so much. I just gotta get there. So my name is Ashley Stone. I am the founder of the VillageApp, and I just wanted to start off by thanking everyone for having me and essentially giving me your attention, because right now you could be anywhere doing anything, but you're here listening to me. And so thank you for that. I know attention is kind of an interesting thing these days. It seems that everyone is after it, and it's actually become a bit of a commodity. There's a lot of technology platforms out there essentially competing for your eyeballs and trying to get them to give them as much of your time, which is essentially equal to your life, as possible. And because of this, we're overwhelmed with so much information daily that our average attention span for anything online is about 7 seconds. So how can we possibly cut through all the noise when we have real needs as individuals or organizations? What if platforms were built on intention instead of attention? What if we went to platforms for a purpose and they didn't suck us into an endless scroll hole? What would that look like? So before I get there, I want to take us back to 2019. So what do you think when you look at this picture? Now, you might see a sweet family coupled up for story time. But what I see is a mom who's exhausted, overwhelmed, and alone. And if, in case you haven't guessed, that is me there. I see my oldest son trying to stay still during story time, but his undiagnosed autism and ADHD just wasn't letting him. I see my daughter so tiny at 2 years old, trying to navigate all the emotions that come with that, and also trying to understand these two little humans that came crashing in to our world. I ended up having a surprise third pregnancy that turned into twins, and that's kind of where it led me here. There's also other factors that aren't shown, like the fact that my mom was battling breast cancer at this time and that my husband was leaving for work in just a few weeks. And honestly, I just really want to jump into this picture and help me. The ironic thing is that I had plenty of people offering me help, from good friends, family, acquaintances, and colleagues. I'm a registered nurse of 13 years. I have a specialty in public health, and I have a very vast network of helpful women around me, but I still felt really awkward accepting these offers of help or asking for them, really. And when I did find myself in situations that I absolutely couldn't manage alone, when my husband was away, I did try texting, group messaging, and posting publicly, but essentially it was for everyone to see my desperation on social media. And there was something about that just didn't work. It didn't feel good. It didn't make me feel good. And it also was lost in the noise and the algorithm of social media. Now, we know belonging to a community is as important as food and water. Our network is our net worth, and there's plenty of research that shows strong networks are better for our physical and mental health and actually extend our life expectancy. The problem, though, is that a lot of people feel that they can't reach their network, and many rely on government systems and organizations for aids. And these systems just can't adequately support all of us. And up until now, there really hasn't been a dedicated platform for people to connect in a judgment-free way. What we are stuck with is noisy, toxic platforms that care more about getting our attention and keeping it than our actual well-being. And that's where the Village app comes in. It's a place to gather your people and create a supportive community. No matter the life stage you're in, we all have something to offer, and we all need a little help sometimes. We call this collective coordination to meet each other's needs. Now, this could look like babysitting, meal sharing, volunteering. The point is that you get to choose what your village looks like, because it's as unique as you. We also don't have an algorithm, popularity points, or a comment section. We do have a currently functional platform for individuals. We're just working on a revamp, so it's going to look slightly different than what it looks like in the picture there. And we're starting to work with nonprofits and other community organizations like faith-based communities to build our network faster, because we know that people feel more connected and comfortable when they bond over a mutual interest. We also know that simply having people around you doesn't mean that you're not lonely or isolated. There are tons of people who have people physically close to them who still feel extremely lonely. And that's because true connection happens when we are open, honest, and vulnerable, and that simply doesn't exist on current platforms. Now, since building this app myself, it has created a shift within me to be more community focused. I'm always thinking about how I can help service my friends, family, and neighbors, and how I can utilize them to fulfill my own needs. I've made some great connections with neighbors just because of this mentality shift. And we've honestly saved each other in so many situations, from, Tylenol to watching a kid while another one is being rushed to emergency, to just, sharing childcare or food sometimes too. So I often ask people, would you ask a friend, family, or neighbor for help? And you get these kind of maybe responses. And now if I switch it and say, would you help someone if they asked? People say, absolutely, I would. And so now we have to remember that that's how others feel about us when we ask them. So I encourage you all, as you move forward into your hackathon, to think about your own barriers and hesitations for asking for help. Then I encourage you to practice some perspective taking on what someone else's might be. So for example, a single mom who has no means of transportation, no job because she can't afford childcare, and isn't sure where her next meal is coming from. When someone is in this constant state of fight or flight, they can't see beyond their situations. They can't fathom a way out. It's like when a bear is chasing you. Are you thinking about what you should be doing to improve your own mental health? No, you're trying to get away from that bear. And that's why a lot of people who are in situations that cause isolation and loneliness stay there, because they can't constantly are just trying to get away from the bear all day, every day. And so finally, I leave you with a question, and that's what's stopping you from building your own village that you deserve. Thanks. I was a little quicker than intended, but
Oh, no, that's fantastic. It gives time for people to ask any questions. So I'll just open the floor to anyone who wants to ask Ashley any questions.
it was so comprehensive. There's no questions.
You did too good of a job.
Too good of a job. Wow.
I have a
Okay.
question.
Yeah, sure.
What is your thoughts and what considerations have you had around concerns of like safety and either providing too much information or letting kind of strangers in to help?
Yeah, and that's a great question. And then one we get often. So there's kind of two sides to that. One is that in no means is our message, go out and invite strangers into your house. It's, we looked at dating apps, we looked at other things, what kind of safety precautions they have. And honestly, there was nothing. And people on dating apps essentially do a lot of different things than we're expecting people to do on the Village app. But with that being said, doesn't mean that we can't, look at safety and be safety at the forefront. So we want people to get to know each other in a safe environment, not necessarily their home, but perhaps a public space. So if you're wanting to meet a new mom, then maybe you go to a public space like a park. This is also a very curated experience. So if you don't want to be, public, we have a lot of different, so you can hide like specific information. So if you don't want to be found, we have a friend finder and nearby neighbor feature. If you don't want to be found on those, you just click them off. If you just want your friends and family to be in here, and your main issue is not necessarily that you don't have people, it's that you don't know how to ask for them, then that you can just create these circles essentially that make sense to you. And that's very safe, obviously, because these trusted people. In the future, we will be working towards, some trust scores and ratings so that people can visually see who kind of is more trustworthy based on these scores. But we do have to understand that despite what the news says, a lot of people are good people. It takes common sense. And despite, all of the safety precautions we can put online, it still does require a human touch to go forward. But great question. Thank you.
And there's a question in the chat from Danielle. How do people find their village? Do you have to invite them, or is it geographic based?
Yeah, so you can definitely invite people. We do have you connect Facebook, SMS, all that kind of stuff. So if you were an individual and you were on the platform, you can send out an invite to people. And then if there's already people already in your neighborhood who have selected that they want to be part of the nearby neighbor, you can, or and the friend finder, you can just search them. You can search them by interest, by life stage, whatever you choose, and you can find people that way. And that's part of the reason why we're working with community organizations, because it's a really heavy lift, essentially onboarding individuals, and does require a concentrated amount of people in one area. So that's why we're starting to work with these community organizations that essentially already have these communities, already have these trusted networks of people within their community. And they just are lacking the technology essentially to connect them. And with that being said, let's say as a church, for example, there's plenty of helpful people in a church and plenty of people who need help. And and the church isn't always able to help everybody. So being on the VillageApp, the church has kind of its own public circle that belongs to the church. And people can actually help each other. So members can help each other. It's not always dependent on the church. So if someone says, I'm hosting a Ukrainian family and I need like a bed, that goes out to everybody within that church community, and someone can step up and say, I can help with that. And the way it's structured is very simple asks and offers. So there's not a lot of room for, chit chat or what I like to call unhelpful help, when people are making suggestions that are just not helpful.
Excuse me, Ashley. As a father of a 4-year-old and a 4-month-old, I certainly sympathize with feeling overwhelmed still constantly. And the idea of like how to trust, to what extent to trust people in your network is something that's on the mind a lot. Through the VillageApp, what's like a low level, like an entry level ask to like find out what people are willing to offer?
That's a great question. The main ask that we do see often is food. That's a huge thing that people are asking for right now. And that's a pretty low level amount of trust if you're just dropping off something. So kind of the items and just a quick exchange is kind of the lowest level. I mean, it does require someone to trust that you're going to come to their house and possibly property, the same as a marketplace. And you can, meet up on a public space of, everybody. It's interesting. Everyone has different comfort levels, and we're trying to, accommodate for everybody's comfort level online. I also like to say that I met my husband, my business partner, my best friend online. So true connections can happen if we're willing to put a little bit of trust in there and use some common sense. But yeah, some entry level. And it's so interesting too, because there were so many people saying, if you would have just asked, I would have helped you. And I was like, I didn't even know you wanted to help me. Like, I didn't even know that was an option, because there was one example where my husband was out of town. My twins were in swimming lessons, and I can't bring them both myself to swimming lessons because they were only like 4 months old at the time, or 5 months old. And I ended up putting this SOS out on Facebook. And because that wasn't a really vulnerable ask, it's not like I'm struggling, I'm not sleeping, it's just I need help with swim lessons, right? And so I ended up running into a few people who were like, oh, I checked my calendar and I just couldn't swing it. And I was like, I wouldn't even asked you. I'm totally fine with you. You're a friend of mine, but I didn't even think you wanted to. And so that was just so eye-opening, just to see these people who actually checked their calendars, who actually were like, I would have loved to. And then the people who did show up for me, it was a colleague of mine with her 2 daughters, and they came in with this brigade. They were helping me change the kids in the change room. And I was like, this is lovely, and that it was just such an inspiration that this is how it should be. I shouldn't be there struggling with 4 kids by myself. There's these lovely, helpful people, but not everybody knows that you need help. And it's kind of a taboo subject in our society of asking for help, but it shouldn't be, because everybody wants to help. That's what we're built to do, is help each other.
Oh, sorry, Will, was that? That kind of reminded me of in the north of England, where I grew up. There's this phrase that you'd ask someone for tea bags. If you've got someone coming around and you realize you haven't got tea bags and you can't make them a cup of tea, you've got the people next door and you just rush around and grab a couple of tea bags from them. And I think having someone who you can rely on for tea bags, it's a lot easier to be able to, if you're in a situation, you can reach out to them and say, I know I usually just ask for tea bags, but you don't mind just quickly helping with this.
Yeah. It's been fantastic just getting to know my neighbors too, and not necessarily through the app, but just having that mindset of openness. My son had an asthma attack at 10 o'clock at night. And any of my help that I would, usually say, come over, was at least a 20-minute drive away, and we needed immediate medical attention. His puffers weren't working for him, and my neighbor was down her driveway in under 3 minutes, and I was out of the driveway, and we were at the hospital within 15. So it just having that hyper local help is lovely.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Ashley.
Thanks for having me, and I'm happy none of my kids interrupted us. They're all here watching a movie right now.
Okay, we will move on to the next. I believe I've made everyone from the public art panel co-hosts. So if you are